Welcome, everyone, to Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We're your hosts and co-founders of FantasyForesight.com, coming to you from the Rambo Fixture Company studios. I'm Ben.
And I'm Jay.
You ready to get rolling, Jay?
You know it. Let's do this.
All right, let's go. Welcome in, everyone. It is Thursday, June 18th. And we are back for another episode in our What We Learned in 2019 series. And tonight, we have got the all-important, all-exciting running backs to discuss with you. We've got our guy, Steve, at FF_encyclopedia. And once again, Fantasy Foresight, the podcast, is live. How you doing tonight, Jay?
Ben, I am ready to go, my friend. We spent over an hour talking about tight ends last week, so buckle up, everybody. It's the marathon episode of Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. 24 straight hours talking about running backs. Steve, how are you doing tonight, my friend?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm not going to bed tonight. We're talking running backs, but I'm so pumped for this episode, guys. I mean, you both know me when it comes to fantasy football. I love me some running backs, so can't wait to dive in. And thanks for having me on, as always, folks.
We've got an episode for everybody tonight. This is going to be a fun one.
Yes, sir. You know what? I don't care about the concerns with COVID and whether or not they think they're going to currently be able to pull off the NFL season. I have faith. I'm wearing my Jarvis Landry Bless Him shirt tonight, and I am ready to just dive into some fantasy football. So first up, we have got Christian McCaffrey. You guys just go ahead and kick back and hang out because I'm going to be here for a while. He is, of course, the RB1. He is, of course, going at the 101 spot because he didn't miss a game last season or in any other game of his career. He's first in nearly every RB stat rank that we took, and we looked at 24 for this episode. He had 278 rushing attempts for 1,361 yards at a 4.9 yard per carry clip, and he added 14 rushing touchdowns. On top of that, he decided he wanted to be a baller wide receiver as well and had 132 targets with 109 receptions for 933 yards at a 7 yards per target average and 4 additional receiving touchdowns. Of the 24 stat ranks that we measured for the RB position, he had 23 RB1 stat ranks, and 21 of those were top 6. The lone outlier was yards per target, and in that, he was a terrible, I say that in jest, 13th. Just total domination statistically for CMC in 2019. And in 2020, I don't expect CMC to experience the average regression that high-volume running backs have largely suffered over the years, and here's why. Last year wasn't that big of an outlier for him. Prior to his 2,392-yard total all-purpose yards in 2019, he still had 1,965 total yards in 2018. So while it was an improvement, it wasn't some like he came out of nowhere. In his rookie season, he had over 1,000 total yards with 1,065 in 2017 as well. So with a 3-year sample size of CMC, you get an average of 1,800 total yards. His career total TDs aren't that crazy either. He averaged 13 over 3 seasons, having 7 his rookie season, 13 in 2018, and he did jump up to 19 in 2019. That could go down, but it might not either. Targets over his career, 114, 124, 142. The man has never seen double-digit or single-digit targets. Yards per touch is what really jumps off the page to me. In his rookie season, 5.5 yards per touch. 2018, 6 yards per touch. Last season, 5.9 yards per touch. That's a 3-year average of 5.9 yards per touch. 33 of those touches come off receptions as well. So they're not even that high punishment when it comes to all the rushing attempts that he has. For some perspective, there's a prolific guy named LaDainian Tomlinson, who over the first 3 years of his career averaged 4.83 yards per touch, 4 yards, 4.8 yards, and 5.7 yards. Again, CMC's average is a whole yard better than that at 5.9. And in Carolina, They just paid CMC. He is the guy. Check down Teddy Bridgewater's coming to town. So, I don't see his targets going down whatsoever. There is no threat to either his running back role nor his goal line touches role, in which he was number 1 in 2019 in goal line touches. Regarding durability concerns, he's only made the injury report 6 of 48 weeks, and all were very minor. And per playerprofile.com, he was 3rd in evaded tackles and took 0 big hits in 2019. Tell me why CMC is not going to dominate, especially in full PPR leagues in 2020.
I mean, the clear answer is I can't. I mean, you made a strong comparison to LaDainian Tomlinson, who is in the Fantasy Football Hall of Fame as far as fantasy scorers goes, and his comparison is very similar. He is fantasy royalty at this point in his young career. He's won many people championships, and we've talked about it in prior podcasts where you can't expect. I should say it is difficult to expect a player to have that type of production for a sustained period of time. It's just, you can't bank on that type of production, but even with assumed regressions, he's still a top 3 running back in fantasy scoring. Even if you assume the worst, he's still a top 3 guy. He's the most bankable guy right now at the running back position in fantasy football. The only trouble is, it's just going to be shocking when he tears all 6 tendons in both knees, or ligaments in both knees at the same time. It's never been done before, Steve.
Why would you put that evil on CMC? Nobody out there knows why you would do
everything. But I mean, yeah. To your point, guys, when it comes to CMC, he certainly could very well finish in the top 3, and you're not going to be disappointed with that. So, we know there's going to be regression, and you have to go back actually to Priest Holmes in 2002, 2003 for the last time that we've had an RB1 overall actually repeat. So the likelihood of CMC doing it, in my opinion, is it's probably just not going to happen. But it is, and you guys know I was going to bring this up, but I did write a piece a little earlier in this offseason when I was talking about, I went back and I looked at every instance in the last 20 years in the NFL that running backs have logged 400 touches or more, and just kind of looked at what they did the following season. And Ben, you brought the guy up, LaDainian Tomlinson. He's the only guy that has been able to sustain and in some metrics improve the following season. However, everybody else has failed and failed miserably. So it just goes to show like how difficult it is to get that kind of a workload and sustain your productivity the next season. If there is anyone who can do it, it's definitely Christian McCaffrey. And
Steve, and I guess
if I have the 101 in drafts, I'm still taking Christian McCaffrey.
Absolutely. And that would be my one question is, the statistics say it's very improbable for a guy to continue to repeat this level of fantasy production and production in general. But if anybody is going to do it, who else has been as dominant, both in the rushing attack and passing attack, as CMC has been over the last couple years? And not only that, his production has increased each of the last 3 years. So it would just be, it's almost as difficult in my mind to see a huge significant drop-off, barring some sort of unforeseen injury. And I was saying all that before in jest, but it seems like he would fall somewhere in the range of what we've already seen from him, and that has been nothing but great.
Well, that's the biggest thing, Jay, is the passing game. There's been such a evolution in how running backs are utilized, how they get their touches. And Ben, you said it. What was it? 33%? Essentially a third of CMC's touches are through the air. And that is just much different than some of the guys that were in the study I did. When you look back at, an Eddie George, a Ricky Williams, guys that really were not pass catchers. So, if, like you said, Jay, if someone's going to do it, it certainly would be Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, and I don't pull LaDainian Tomlinson out of thin air. Number one, I do think that CMC is that kind of generational talent. Number two, I was surprised to see how similarly sized these two guys were. LT was 5'10", 215. Christian McCaffrey's only 1 inch taller and 10 pounds lighter. Huh. So, I mean, they're really, really similarly tight built guys. And through this point of LT's career, he had 401 more touches, 401 more rushes, 65 less targets, and 336 total more touches. So, and then in LT's fourth season, despite all that wear and tear on a very similarly sized frame with a lot less PPR production, he finished as RB2 overall. Almost 1,800 total yards and 18 touchdowns in that 2004 season in his fourth year, after having, that crazy, his crazy first 3 seasons that he had as a rookie, even better than CMC. But the thing that jumps out to me, though, is just the combination of the evasiveness, the avoiding all big hits all together in 2019, the lesser wear and tear over a 3-year sample size, and a 3-year sustaining average of 6 yards per touch. Like, that's insane. And so it's not just what he did last year, it's what he's done in a historical perspective, and it's the situation around him. It's that they just paid him. It's that they just brought in probably a more efficient quarterback situation than what they had last year after Cam got hurt, but yet he's still going to be a guy that checks down and doesn't go deep very often. And another thing that people don't discuss is Cam was always good for vulture and touchdowns. That was part of the reason why CMC had more touchdowns last year. He now does not have a quarterback that is going to vulture goal line touches from him, and that's why he was number 1 in that statistic in 2019, and I don't see that changing at all in 2020.
All right, you built quite a compelling case for what CMC did, not only in 2019, but what you expect him to do in 2020. But let's let the listeners in on the real reason why the love fest is occurring this lovely evening.
Is it the same reason why you're wishing such evil injuries on such a nice human being and historical NFL talent?
Who knows? All right, who's number 2 on our list?
Number 2 is your favorite running back in the league.
Yeah, here we go.
RB2 at the 102 is none other than New York Giants running back Saquon Barkley. In just 12 games last season, Saquon had 200 rush attempts, 911 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. He added another 69 targets, 49 receptions, 413 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. He was an elite top 6 running back in fantasy points per game, Foresight consistency, both the number and percentage of top 6 weeks, and 20-plus yard rushes with 7 of those type of big plays. He did all that in just 12 games, and he had another 10 regular old RB1 stat ranks. Fully healthy heading into year 3 with a 2-year average of 1,700 total yards and 11.5 touchdowns per season. He has as good a chance as anyone to finish as the RB1 overall in 2020. And I've got a little bonus stat that I love just for you, Jay. Saquon has only fumbled 1 time in 621 total NFL touches. This dude is a boss, and if he plays 16 games this season, you're in trouble again, my friend.
You know what? You hit on it, Ben. All I heard was he missed 4 games last year. You know, a real running back would have made it all 16 games, but that's fine, whatever. You know, those people from Penn State have durability issues. But let's move on to some more interesting stats. You know, RB16 in yards per attempt, that's mediocre at best. RB22 in rushing TDs, that's not very exciting. RB14 in receiving TDs in today's NFL, I can do better.
I love it so much.
And I just want to throw in there that Saquon Barkley only got 7 touches inside the 5-yard line compared to the aforementioned Christian McCaffrey, who had 17 that led the league. And Saquon
that's why
Barkley,
I didn't trade for Saquon and I traded for CMC.
Exactly. And Saquon was one of 3 running backs to have negative yardage inside the 5-yard line. He did only punch in 1 touchdown inside the 5. So that's something that,
that fits your narrative, Jay.
Yeah, I was trying to help. I was trying to help you out a little bit there, Jay. And then also, I found this to be a little bit interesting. Especially when we talk about yards per target, how that equals out to fantasy points per target. We all have the Saquon Barkley in our minds from 2018, his rookie season, where he was just an absolute monster. I mean, there's a reason why he was the 101 in drafts last season.
Sure.
He was targeted, I think it was like 132 times, caught 91 of those. So in PPR, an absolute stud. And last season, a little bit different. With Eli Manning checking down to him, 7.6 targets a game. Last season, 5.6 targets a game. Over the 15-week fantasy season, that's 30 less targets, and that's definitely substantial. So, hopefully, they can get it together a little bit on the goal line to help, make up for that lack in passing productivity. But as I'm talking to you guys right now, I'm kind of like, I don't know if I would necessarily take Saquon at the 102. There's a lot of mouths to feed in New York. A lot of guys. Golden Tate, Darius Slayton, Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram. Those guys probably all won't be healthy on the field at the same time in 2020, but there's a lot of mouths.
Neither will Saquon, so it's fine.
So, what I'm trying to say is you want to take Ezekiel Elliott.
There it is.
We'll
there
get
we
to him
go.
a little bit later.
Yeah, we will, and I agree with you. There are a couple of running backs coming up that I would take above Saquon, but he wouldn't drop too far down my rankings board. But number 3, I was surprised to see Zeke not be number 2. I was even more surprised to see Zeke not be number 3. And right now, your current ADP running back 3 at the 105 is New Orleans Saints running back Alvin Kamara. In just 13 games last year, he had 163 rushing attempts, 758 yards, and 3 touchdowns. 94 targets, 79 receptions, and 515 receiving yards, and 1 additional touchdown. Very low productivity for Alvin Kamara's 3-year sample size. But still, despite the injury, despite the missed time, he had 16 of 24 running back 1 stat ranks. 6 of those 16 were top 6 finishes. And he added 6 more RB2 stat ranks. His lowest ranked 2019 stats are, oddly enough, what have me excited about his outlook in 2020. His 2 worst stat ranks were yards per target and total touchdowns. His career yards per target is 6.83, and in the 2 years prior to 2019, when he wasn't battling injury, his average yards per target was 7.5. Compare that to 5.48 in 2019, and you see the opportunity for some positive regression. Also, his career combined TDs per season is 12. He had only 6 in 2019, despite averaging 15.5 in the 2 years prior. So like I said, the yards per target increase and the total touchdown increases are on their way for Kamara in 2020. And if he plays 3 more games that he did last year, he'll be every bit worth that 105 price tag.
I gotta say, I'm pretty surprised and pretty impressed with the fantasy community that he is currently going as RB3 after having a down year last year when he only got in the end zone 4 times. And his fantasy scoring, his efficiency in fantasy scoring isn't what we've seen historically from Alvin. But like you said, Ben, the upside is there. 1 receiving touchdown last year, that's not very Alvin Kamara-like. And 3 rushing touchdowns. I mean, there is tremendous upside there, and that's in addition to the fact that he still had almost 1,300 all-purpose yards in only 13 games played, so averaging 100 all-purpose yards every single game. So if he can stay healthy, I would think the touchdowns would increase now that they've added some additional weapons on the outside to help free him up a little bit. So yeah, the upside, in my opinion, is there for him in 2020. And like I said, it surprises me a little bit that he didn't fall down the draft board because of that, because we tend to overreact to down years. Instead, he's moving up. I love it. I mean, I wish I could get him at a better value, but I'm happy for him.
No, absolutely. I agree with you guys 100% on everything. I don't think we're going to see 2017, 2018 touchdown numbers, but he's certainly not going to just get in the end zone 6 times either. So, I totally pegged him for that, probably around 10 touchdowns, double digits, and as long as he's pulling in the receptions that we're used to seeing out of him, and if he, obviously this goes with every running back we talk about the rest of the night. It's the position with the highest attrition for a reason. So it's like, if he's healthy, he's gonna put up high-end RB1 numbers. It's just what's gonna happen. So, I could not fault anyone for taking Alvin Kamara as the RB3.
Not at all. And I mean, when you think about how down of a year that everybody felt like he had, that still equated to RB11 overall and RB8 in fantasy points per game. Like, that's his down year. So, yeah, big things for Kamara in 2020. I definitely would prefer him over Saquon, and I don't think I'm alone in that.
Not alone.
Not at all. Steve, are we 3 for 3 on that decision in 2020 on this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I really think so. I mean, I would love it if Saquon was on the Saints, but he's not.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, agreed. Yeah, no doubt. Next up, who we all agree should probably be the ADP RB2, currently sitting at a value as ADP RB4, also at the 105 spot, is Dallas Cowboys quarterback Ezekiel Elliott. He was not happy that it came out that he tested positive for COVID, but so far all signs point to the fact that he is asymptomatic. And a little peek behind the curtain, as soon as that happened, as soon as that news broke, I immediately text Steve, because in our one keeper league of record, Zeke is his one keeper. And I was joking with him like, obviously you better trade me Zeke right now because he's just garbage.
He's threatened to sit out the season because of a HIPAA violation.
I mean, we had a really good laugh about it, but in our discussions, we actually came around to the opposite side of this, saying, this could actually be a net positive for Zeke to test positive for COVID at this point, to theoretically potentially develop some antibodies and have maybe a lesser likelihood of contracting it again during the season. Like that, having a running back that plays every single game for you this season is going to be more valuable than ever if they are a productive one. So, oddly enough, I'm hearing that Zeke is dropping in ADP as a result of this news, but maybe as we get closer to the draft and people stop overreacting to that, maybe that'll normalize a little bit. But, he played all 15 games last year. He had 283 rushing attempts, 1,235 rushing yards, 11 total rushing touchdowns. He was still involved in the passing game with 66 targets, 51 receptions, 418 receiving yards, and an additional receiving touchdown. Zeke had 18 of 24 running back stat ranks, and 14 of those were top 6. He added 3 more RB2 stat ranks, and his 3 worst stat ranks are all very flukish in my opinion. Those 3 were the long run, 20-plus yard runs, and fumbles lost, which he only had 2. Additionally, he's averaged 1,750 total yards per season in his career. So without a holdout or contract dispute, Zeke has as much chance as anyone to finish as the RB1 overall in 2020.
I can't disagree. He is a true workhorse back. He is durable. He is strong. So, I mean, the fact that he's falling down draft boards right now makes me want to pause this podcast and go do some best ball drafts real quick and just get him at a nice value before he comes back up. And you know what, Ben? You touched on a point that, we really haven't addressed all that much on this podcast, and that is, the effect that COVID-19 could have on this NFL season. And like you said, he's kind of getting it, hopefully, possibly behind him. And, I know it's been discussed not only in our league of record, but on other podcasts and other shows and around leagues all around the country about what to do. Do you add an injury spot for players that test positive? What if half your team tests positive or half a team tests positive? How do you handle that during a season? If we see another reemergence, do we end the season early? How's all that going to go? So there's so many variables, but like you said, right now, I love the fact that Zeke is getting this behind him, and to your point, it's something that I don't feel right now knowing what we know at this point, like I have to worry about it come the season. So yeah, I mean, he's locked and loaded, ready to go. This team should be firing on all cylinders, since they're all keeping the band together this season. And Zeke is an Iron Man. I know he's going to be on the field when I need him.
Yeah, I mean, you guys make excellent points when it comes to COVID-19. It's just, this is unprecedented. And, I mean, the thing is, these are all world-class athletes, right? So I do think a vast majority of these NFL players that could contract the virus probably would be just fine to still go out and play, but unfortunately they're going to have to be quarantined and probably miss a couple of games, if there's not a bye week that bails them out of missing 2 games. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what comes to be with Zeke Elliott. It's I kind of think it's kind of, I don't want to say cool, but it's interesting that it's such a big name in the sport.
Oh yeah,
that has tested positive. When it comes to fantasy football, that we are able to have this discussion now, way ahead of the season. I'm kind of thankful that for the fantasy community, anyways, that we can have this discussion now. But quick stat I do want to throw out there for all you Zeke Elliott fans: last season, got 12 totes within the 5-yard line, punched in 9 of them. Highest percentage of conversion out of anyone in the NFL. You got to expect that out of Zeke. He's a tough, strong back with a great line in front of him.
And I was going to say, I'll just say this real quick. One quick fantasy football note. I would bank as many wins as you possibly can early on in the season, because we don't know how this season's going to go. We don't know where this is going to go, so let's get as many wins as we can as early on as possible.
That is a very valid point. Be in first place with the most points scored.
Yes.
Well, and we're not the first podcast or group of fantasy analysts to discuss this, but if there was ever a year to handcuff your high-end running backs, especially if there is a capable replacement on the team, this is the year to do that. I mean, man, just to go off topic a little bit, honestly, that's part of my strategy. We're in a 1-keeper league, and I somehow traded for 2 players. It's not unheard of, but it's not typical either. And I'm just thinking, I kind of want to handcuff both those guys to a certain degree if I can, because, you build your team around, such 2, guys that are expected to support so much. And it's like, if either one of those go out, you better have a backup plan.
It's going to be a wild one. Yep, for sure.
Exactly. Sure. We normally talk about hey, in the late rounds, get those, dart throw kind of players. And it's like, I think what's much more valuable is
the insurance policy
for your guys.
Yep.
And also, this is the year that maybe it's not such a jerk move to be drafting other people's handcuffs. You really I love
doing that to everybody.
I mean, Kansas City is an example. Latavius Murray, Madison's an example. I digress. I'm so ready for preview pod season, and we're sounding a lot like those episodes right now. So we are going to move it on and bring it back into topic. What we learned in 2019.
Perfect. Let's do. This one's going to be fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's get it back on the rails so we can get right back off the rails.
Yeah.
Because we have got ADP, RB5, Civil War inducing the fantasy foresight last season between me and Steve-O. You've got Derrick Henry going at the 107 spot. This man did miss 1 game due to injury, but in spite of that, he put together an excellent fantasy season, finishing as RB7 overall and RB7 in points per game. He had 271 attempts for 1,329 yards and 4.9 yards per carry and 13 rushing touchdowns. I'm going to pause for a second because we forgot to mention at the beginning of this episode, all of our statistics that we discuss are from weeks 1 to 16. So if you're looking at season-long stats that take in week 17 into account, you might be wondering why the numbers are a little bit different. That's why. Full PPR, 12-team redraft format is what is most applicable to this podcast, specifically weeks 1 to 16. Sorry it took us 4 running backs before I thought to say that. And, I told you how great Derrick Henry was on the ground. He was up and down when it came to the passing game, and I'll get to that in a second. He only had 18 receptions on 24 targets for 206 yards, but he had 8.58 yards per target and 2 receiving touchdowns. Overall, DH had 18 of 24 RB1 stats. 13 of those 18 were top 6, and he added another 2 RB2 stat ranks, and his 4 worst stat ranks can all easily improve in 2020. Those were fumbles lost, which were 3, targets, receptions, and receiving yards. Here's why I say they can easily improve. Though he was 49th in targets, 51st in receptions, and 37th in receiving yards, he was 14th in receiving touchdowns and 3rd in yards per target. Coach Braves, Ryan Tannehill, this is your guy, Foresight then. You might want to think about throwing DH the ball a little bit more in 2020. Just saying, and that'll help me be right about DH over Steve again in 2020.
He's got to catch the ball, but
he caught the ball just fine last season.
I'm going to sit this one out. You guys just have at it.
So, yeah, I mean, heading into last season, I certainly had my reservations when it came to Derrick Henry, and I had no problem at where he was going in drafts. I believe he was in the 4th round. I just couldn't peg him as anything better than like a kind of a mid-range RB2 finisher that would frustrate you more than you'd be happy to have him on your team. And I will, on this podcast right now, admit, overall, I was wrong. And Ben, you were right. And
wow. It's very big of you, Steve.
Yes.
Steve's big tonight.
Yeah, he is.
It pains me greatly, but the biggest thing for me with Derrick Henry, and why I give myself a little bit of an out when it comes to why I thought what I thought about Derrick Henry, it all came to touches. Like, he has to get the touches, and in the Tennessee offense with Marcus Mariota at quarterback, I just couldn't see the path to that happening. And you saw it taking place last year in 2019 where, Derrick Henry has a month-long stretch of 4 weeks where he's a regrettable player on your fantasy team. Enter Ryan Tannehill. Enter a competent offense. Enter a Tennessee team that is on top of the scoreboard heading into the 3rd, 4th quarter, second half of football games, and boom, you see Derrick Henry get the workload, rack up monster games. I mean, he was the RB2 in the second half of the fantasy season. I mean, goodness, you can't argue with that. So, when it comes to drafting him next year, as we talked about a little bit before we got on the podcast tonight, in full PPR, it's still a little iffy because you just never know. There's so many of these teams that make it to the Final Four, the AFC-NFC Championship game, and they're duds in the next season. And so will that be Tennessee? If that happens, what does that mean for Derrick Henry and how he is as a fantasy asset? So it's tough, and again, it pains me, but I was wrong.
Wow.
Now I'm gonna go just lay down.
A lot of growing and maturing on this podcast tonight.
Yeah, and Steve, you're right. During weeks 3 to 6, DH was awful. He had an RB2 finish and 2 top 25 finishes with Marcus Mariota, and that was after he had a top 3 finish and a top 9 finish. And then, like you said, once Ryan Tannehill took over, he was RB2. So I just think with the full season of Ryan Tannehill, knowing that this is quite possibly DH's last year in the offense, and if Coach Braves listens, Ryan Tannehill listens, pass my man the ball more than 1.5 times a game, please. Good things happen when you do it. The numbers prove it out. So, moving on. Steve, you're right about a lot more stuff than you're wrong at, and God knows you've beaten me in fantasy more times than I can count. So I appreciate you giving me this one, and we'll move it on to our next running back. We've got RB6 at the 108 overall. Got a Minnesota Vikings running back, Dalvin Cook. He played the most games he's ever played in his NFL career, playing 14 games last year. 250 attempts, 1,135 rush yards, 13 total rushing touchdowns, 63 targets, 53 receptions, another 519 receiving yards, and 0 receiving touchdowns. Dalvin had an excellent season, especially by his measure, in 2019. But my biggest concerns for him heading into 2020 are the departures of offensive coordinator Kevin Stefanski, who is now the head coach of Barkley Browns, and wide receiver Stephon Diggs. And of course, it's well documented that he's missed 19 of 48 career games due to injury. But I will say, to his credit, he has played more and more games every single season in the NFL, and he had his best season yet in 2019, including 20 of 24 RB1 stat ranks. 14 of those were top 6. All right. He added another 2 RB2 stat ranks. So he only had 2 stat ranks outside of RB2. Those were fumbles lost, which was 2, not the worst thing in the world, and receiving touchdowns, which was 0. So great 2019 season, but the contract dispute combined with the concerns above equals I'm probably staying away at the price point, despite what he was able to show me in 2019.
Yeah, I think the holdout concern is a major concern at this point. You know, it's funny because we were always down on Dalvin Cook because of his durability issues, and he proved last season that he can finally get through the most part of a season healthy and be elite. So I'm willing to trust that guy more now, but now we have these other concerns, and we've seen what happens to guys who hold out. You know, you've got hammy issues, soft tissue issues, slow starts, what have you. So just when I was going to throw my hat in the ring and say, you know what, fine, I'm finally on the Dalvin Cook bandwagon, I would trust this guy to be on my fantasy team, he does this. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of him. I was glad to see him finally bounce back and have an elite season. I was very surprised to hear you tell me how 20 of 24 stat categories that we measured, he was an RB1 level. That is elite across the board. And really the ones where he missed out, you know, 2 fumbles, not a big deal. We saw that with Zeke, same number of fumbles. I'm not really concerned about 2 fumbles. And then, 0 receiving touchdowns. The good thing is the only way you can go is up there. So,
if he has some rushing touchdown regression,
right,
he could in turn have some receiving touchdown positive.
You would hope so. Now you do have Madison kind of nipping at his heels there, and you don't know how that tandem's going to play out. But yeah, if he can get his contract issue resolved, and if we are going to play a full season, I'm in on Dalvin this season.
Yeah, so guys, where he's going right now in drafts, I'm so off of Dalvin.
Okay, excellent point, Steve. You get a point. Ding. If we had the around the horn, you get a point for that.
And I mean, so we obviously have the he's never played a full season in the NFL. Let's face it. And you made a great point, Jay, with a holdout, and also, I keep bringing it up, but COVID-19, the way it's impacting off seasons for NFL teams.
Yeah.
A lot of those players are responsible for their own training and health and readiness heading into the NFL season. So you add these extra little question marks to somebody who already has question marks.
Right.
And you look at his price point, and I know that running back is such a irreplaceable position in fantasy football, and I know that the well dries up so quickly on these guys, but man, at that 108 spot, I could just think of a lot safer, better options to go with, and
it does seem like we've hit
I could never even pull the trigger on that, and this is before the holdout, actually. So.
It does definitely seem like we've hit a teardrop at this point.
Oh, certainly,
without a doubt.
But yet, these guys are all going in succession still at the midpoint of the first round in drafts.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean,
running back run.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I used to just kind of write guys off and say, I'm just not taking them. Now you kind of have to, in your mind, decide, well, at what point does it become worth it for you to take it? And I mean, it would be pretty hard for me to pass on Dalvin at the turn, especially if there was a big run on, I still probably would, but it would be extremely difficult for me to pass on Dalvin at the turn.
Can I ask you guys, if you were to invest a first-round pick in Dalvin Cook, like how how high would you? At what point would you reach and take Alexander Madison to with everything we've talked about?
I'd overpay, that's for sure.
I was going to say, you're obviously a little less concerned about the injury risk if you are going to pull the trigger on Dalvin.
But as long as that contract, sorry Ben, as long as that contract issue's hanging out there, I'm not jumping and I'm not taking that risk on. I've done that in the past and it came back to bite me, and I won't do it again. So until that's resolved, for me, it's I'm staying off that.
Steve, it might be 7th or 8th round to answer your question. I don't
I was just
know what
thinking
his
that
ADP,
might be my first bench acquisition.
Yeah,
really.
I
get my
don't know what his
out of the way,
ADP
and I'd be
is.
like, I have to back up Dalvin Cook right now. He's my highest draft capital.
He won't last that long in our league, though.
No, he won't. He won't. Especially because a lot of us don't believe in Dalvin. Sorry, Dalvin. We wish you all the best, brother.
Speaking of guys.
Yeah, next up we've got a guy who people are making a leap on in 2020. I was a little skeptical heading to this podcast about it, but after I dug in a little bit, I can kind of see it a little bit more. And as a Browns fan, that makes me feel very dirty and shameful inside. And I'm talking about Cincinnati Bengals running back Joe Mixon, currently going as RB7 at the 108. He did play all 15 games last year in past seasons. Jay and I have harped on injury concerns with him. He has improved in that category every season, now to the point where he did not miss a game in 2019. He had 252 rushing attempts for 975 yards. He did only have an average yards per carry of 3.9 and only 3 rushing touchdowns. He did add 34 receptions on 44 targets for 273 receiving yards and 3 more receiving touchdowns. So at a glance, he only had 8 of 24 RB1 stat ranks, and that does not appear to justify his current ADP of RB7 at 108. But he was 5th in consistency weeks 10 to 16. He was 11th in Foresight consistency, which measures how effective you are as a running back as you go throughout the season. And he finished as a solid RB2 as RB17 overall, despite having just 16 total touchdowns. So then fast forward to the offseason. They draft Joe Burrow. They're getting A.J. Green back. They draft T. Higgins. It's Mixon's second year in head coach Zach Taylor's offense, all of which should lead to increased efficiency and increased touchdowns. So like I said, I hate to say it as a Browns fan, but I kind of understand the logic behind where people are going and taking him. And I don't know that I would take him at the 108, but I'll tell you what, I feel better about taking Joe Mixon at the 108 this year than I do about taking Dalvin Cook at the 108 this year. I'll say that much.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm with you. Look, Joe Mixon is a guy who, in the past, we've been down on this podcast, and we've joked about it because every time we're down on him, he ends up having a great game.
Right.
So, I after last season, he made it through the entire season. He showed he can be dependable. So I was up on him, and then Ben, I'm looking at all these stats that you ran, and the fact that he finished RB15 last season, and he's going with an RB7 price tag, that's quite a leap for a guy who finished
17,
RB17.
To your point.
Yeah, and now his price tag's RB7. Again, I liked him coming into this season. I'm just not sure I want to pay an RB7 price tag with the 8th overall pick in drafts. A guy who finished as RB32 in yards per attempt, RB31 in his longest rush, RB26 in 20-plus rushes, RB32 in rushing touchdowns, RB28 in targets, RB27 in receptions. In PPR especially, you would say there's only one way to go, and that's up. But with Joe Burrow coming in, a new offense, like Steve said, with a very short offseason to get a new quarterback under center, to get everybody on the same page, they are getting a lot of weapons back. They're adding a lot of pieces. I like the future of this offense. I just don't know how quickly it's all going to come together and translate into fantasy production, or at least elite fantasy production. So I don't know what to make of Joe at this point. I like him. I just don't know if I want to pay that price.
Yeah, for me, guys, there's no way I'm paying that price. No way. I
didn't know you were a Joe Mixon hater with us, man. That's good. Welcome to the club.
Love the talent. I just don't like the situation.
Yeah,
and I really honestly don't get how there are so many experts out there and, different podcasts I listen to that are just loving on Joe Mixon and basically also Joe Burrow. Like, this Cincinnati offense in general is suddenly, because Joe Burrow, who's never played an NFL game, will step in and just be incredibly better than Andy Dalton ever was. And I do believe Joe Burrow will get to that point, but he's still going to be an NFL rookie. And again, like you said, Jay, and we've talked about, this offseason in general is just
– it doesn't help.
Not a good one for first-year players entering the league. So,
Steve, go ahead, sorry.
Well, but that's where I am with it. And he's not – Joe Mixon, he has incredible hands. He can catch the ball in the backfield as good as any running back in the NFL. But he's simply just not utilized like that.
No.
So in PPR, I don't see it. I'm looking right now. We're going to talk about Nick Chubb here in a couple of guys. Nick Chubb had more targets than Joe Mixon did last season.
Youch.
What offense would I rather have my RB1 be in? I'd rather, anyways, I'm not going to,
Well, here's the thing, Steve. You make very great points. I happen to agree with you. I can also understand the counter arguments of, Andy Dalton. I like Andy Dalton more than the average fan, analyst, whatever, I think. But they really did Andy Dalton wrong last season on several different levels. And, we're all human beings, and, he came and showed something towards the end. I feel like that was really the only time he really played like himself the whole year. They were messing around, not playing him for lesser talent, not trying to trade him, not letting him do anything before the trade deadline, not communicating their plans. It was just really bad. So I can't imagine the mindset that Andy Dalton was in most of the time, just fighting through, trying to be a professional. So I think my point to saying all that is everybody really felt like the Cincinnati Bengals grossly underachieved on offense last year, where even if Joe Burrow doesn't come in and light the league on fire, there should be a big-time increase in efficiency and touchdowns that directly impacts Joe Mixon. And if that happens, all of a sudden you can start talking about him as a top 10 running back. So I understand the argument. I'm not going to gamble on that argument, but, at least I can understand it a little more than some of the hype I've heard on him in previous years. So we've talked about – oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and I agree, and I get it. I get where people are coming from, and I believe Mixon had, I think, he was averaging like 23 touches the second half of the fantasy football season, but he only averaged 14 touches the first half. So what are we going to get next year? AJ Green's coming back. They brought in T. Higgins. For me, it's hard to make that leap at RB7 based off.
Exactly.
And he wasn't even the RB7 in the second half of the fantasy season. Anyways, I don't hate Joe Mixon, but I hate the situation.
I'd rather have 4 of the next 5 guys instead of Joe Mixon if I'm paying this price tag.
Yeah, next up is another guy. I think we all agree that the masses are a bit higher on than us right now. Currently going as RB8 at the 111. You have Las Vegas Raiders running back Josh Jacobs. Surprise you? It surprised me. In 13 games last season, there were durability issues that we called out on this podcast heading into last season. He did miss 2 games, but in spite of that, he was still able to finish as RB19 overall in full PPR formats and RB15 in fantasy points per game. He had 242 rush attempts for 1,150 yards, 4.75 yards per carry, 7 touchdowns. And then he honestly, they treat him like Derrick Henry over there. 27 targets, 20 receptions, 166 receiving yards, but he doesn't have the yards per target that Derrick Henry has. He didn't convert those into 2 touchdowns. So that's the DH pass catching volume without the upside. I will say, however, that I came into this research for this episode far lower on Josh Jacobs than when I finished. He was barely used in the passing game, like I said, and yet he still finished as just outside a back-end RB1, PPR RB15 in fantasy points per game, 10th in yards per attempt, 7th in overall rush yards, and second in 20-plus yard rushes with 8 of those kind. That said, there's still a couple of guys going behind him that I would still prefer over him. But my opinion on Jacobs has certainly improved. I mean, 8 20-plus yard runs is legit.
That's funny because I feel like my impression of Josh Jacobs has taken a hit after analyzing these stats. He's a guy who I was kind of high on. You know, he had one heck of a rookie season. You expect him to progress and improve, but I'm looking at the stats, and if Gruden's not going to involve him in the passing game, which he hasn't shown that he has with an average of less than 2 catches per game, that's not enough to be fantasy relevant in that dynamic. Is he really going to improve that much on 1,150 yards and 7 touchdowns? To the point where he finished RB15 last year and he's going as RB8 in drafts. How much really is he going to jump up in yards and touchdowns if he's not going to have the upside in PPR to where he can actually return me a positive return on investment?
So we have the parallelism with Derrick Henry. Josh Jacobs also had to sit out your fantasy championship with an injury.
He missed twice as many games as Derrick Henry.
Well, and that's the thing. Like I know I sound like such a hater about some of these running backs, but
not everybody tonight. What's wrong?
Sorry, I got
That's 2 episodes in a row, man. Steve just hates everybody.
I gotta speak the truth. But guys, when it comes to Josh Jacobs, like you alluded to, Jay, there's just not any PPR upside. I mean, I
knocked my light down.
Richard. They drafted Lynn Bowden Jr. Like he's not. Josh Jacobs just simply is not going to be anything more than a first and second down back. So then you have to think, RB8, is that like his ceiling? So why would you want to draft him there? And he hasn't played a full season. And we had these concerns heading into last year because he never even carried a full workload at Alabama. And so here he is in the pros. Why do we expect? He certainly hit a rookie wall last year. I mean, you saw it down the stretch. So, to me, he's fine as an RB2, but the RB8 overall, I just
that will not happen in our league. That won't happen in our league.
It won't be me
for sure. No, I have enough respect for our league mates he's not going as RB8 in our league.
Again, it's funny because this second tier of running backs that we clearly have seen, a lot of the guys going at the top of this tier aren't the guys I would prefer. It's the guys at the bottom of this tier that I'd much rather have.
For sure, and it starts with
upside.
It starts with our next guy, and that's Arizona Cardinals running back Kenyan Drake. I don't know how you guys feel about him. Frankly, I don't care. I love Kenyan Drake in 2020. He's currently going as the RB9 at the back end of the first at the 111 spot, and he sorry, hold on, I just had a little cell issue there. Okay.
Spreadsheets.
His 13 games. Technical difficulties. His 13 games in 2019 consisted of 7 with the Cardinals, and that's excluding an 8th game in Week 17. So in the 7 weeks that we're measuring through Week 16, he had 158 attempts, 757 rushing yards for 4.8 yards per carry. He had 7 touchdowns in that 7-week period. And he added 47 receptions on 64 targets for 322 yards, 0 receiving touchdowns. So in just 7 games from week 9 to 16, he had 3 top 6 finishes with a top 6 rate of 42.8% with the Cardinals. That top 6 percentage would have ranked 3rd behind only Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook over a full season in 2019. He was 9th in yards per carry with 4.79, and 4.8, same thing. And he was on pace to be top 10 in targets. With the addition of DeAndre Hopkins at the wide receiver position, he should face far less stacked defensive fronts. And with 7 touchdowns in weeks 9 to 16, he could be in line for a 2020 touchdown increase too. Like I said, I am all in on Kenyan Drake in 2020.
I don't know what it is. For some reason, I don't want to be in on Kenyan Drake. I don't know what it is. But seeing the numbers, knowing that he is clearly the guy now that they have parted ways with David Johnson, and seeing what he did in games 9 through 16 last season and expecting this offense to take another step forward, of the last few guys we've covered, I would much rather take Kenyan Drake over a Josh Jacobs or a Joe Mixon, and a Dalvin Cook, unless Dalvin Cook resolves his issue. Everything all the arrows are pointing up for Kenyan Drake. So as a guy who, for some reason, I don't know what it is, I don't know if it's his history of being in Miami and everything we went through there, but just I don't want to be on the bandwagon, but I can't deny that I should.
Yeah, I'm kind of with both of you guys when it comes to Kenyan Drake. I will take him all day long over the aforementioned Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs.
And that was going to be my question to both of you after all.
Yes.
You just answered it.
Yeah.
Primarily, it's also like the offense. I mean, Cardinals, they're adding a DeAndre Hopkins. You look at Dalvin Cook in Minnesota, it's like, well, minus Stephon Diggs, minus Kevin Stefanski. Like that, I project all three, Minnesota, Cincinnati, Las Vegas, to just not be high-scoring offenses. There is the opportunity for the Arizona Cardinals to be one of, like a higher-scoring offense, at least in the top half of the league. So I want a running back on that offense. And Kenyan Drake, when he was given the opportunity, which has been the big thing his entire career, is
just like Derrick Henry.
Only Kenyan Drake can catch a ball 30 yards downfield, but that's what I mean. Like Kenyan Drake is he's really talented. When you see him play and you see him in space, it's just like, man, why is this guy not getting the ball more? The biggest question mark will be, he's never been a workload guy. Like, can he handle it? Can he be an RB1 throughout the entire season? But when you're talking about RB9 overall at the 111, I'd rather roll the dice on Kenyan Drake than I would some of these other guys, because the upside for Kenyan Drake, to me, if he can hold up and he can carry the load, he could be one of the top 3 running backs in fantasy football in that offense.
You're absolutely right. We're talking about the ADP RB9, and we haven't talked about a running back I would take ahead of him since the ADP RB5. So I don't know how you feel about it, Jay. I already asked Steve the question. Who are you taking out of Kenyan Drake, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, and Dalvin Cook?
Well, yeah, it's clear. It is.
Boom. I mean,
it is Kenyan Drake. But I'm not sure I'm taking Kenyan Drake before maybe one of the guys we're going to cover next. Should we start the love fest? Can we start? Can we start the love fest? Can we talk about a real value here?
It is a real value, but there's a little bit of real concerns that we can't ignore. As much as I love my guy, Cleveland Browns running back Nick Chubb, just like the epitome of what you could want out of a teammate, out of a professional, out of a person, and out of a running back, a stud running back. Currently going as ADP RB10 at the 202. This man played all 15 games last season. He had 285 rush attempts for 1,453 yards with a 5-yard per carry average, and he had 11, number one in the statistic, 11 20-plus yard runs and 8 rushing touchdowns. He did add 24 receptions on 47 targets for 277 receiving yards and 0 touchdowns. I will say this. Chubb had 13 of 24 RB1 stats, 7 of which were top 6 in 2019. And what we as Browns fans know better than most was one of the most dysfunctional situations in the coaching staff that we have ever seen. And for the Cleveland Browns, that's saying a lot. But he was just RB20 in late season consistency and RB21 in Foresight consistency, in large part due to Kareem Hunt's return from suspension. So here's what we all have to reconcile on Chubb in 2020. His O-line and coaching staff theoretically have both drastically improved, which in turn should elevate the QB play. And with Stefanski's renowned play-action schemes, this all spells improved efficiency for a guy who was already 5th in yards per attempt and 1st in 20-plus yard runs with 11 in 2019. There is just one problem: a full season of Kareem Hunt. There have been reports that Kareem Hunt is working in virtual workouts with the wide receivers. Not sure what that means. I don't know if that's just like working on his pass skills or if they're actually going to line that dude up in the slot. Because if all of a sudden Nick Chubb can be in line to sustain or improve on 47 targets, you're talking about a serious value for Nick Chubb at RB10 in 2020.
I'm not worried about Kareem Hunt at all. I think they both can carve out nice roles in this offense. We've seen the Chicago Bears have an RB1 and an RB2 in the same offense with guys that probably are arguably not as talented as Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt.
No doubt not as talented.
What I love about Nick Chubb is that he was, like you said, he played all 15 games during the fantasy season. He was RB1 in rush attempts, RB1 in rush yards, RB1 in yards per attempt. I'm sorry, RB5 in yards per attempt. Over 5 yards per attempt with that kind of volume. Number 1 in longest rush. Number 1 in 20-plus rushes. And like you said, Ben, this was all in a clunky offense that was much more awkward than any of us expected heading into the season. Things just didn't work out like we thought they were going to early on, and he was still able to muster 1,453 rush yards, and that's with a half season of Kareem Hunt in the fold. And the reason why I'm not as worried about Kareem Hunt getting mixed in more, even with a full season, Nick Chubb only had 24 catches on 47 targets for 277 yards and no touchdowns. So if Kareem Hunt takes all the PPR upside away, Nick Chubb still has value as the standalone bell cow true rushing back.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs and their target volume.
Right, exactly.
In front of Nick Chubb. So, guys, Nick Chubb led the NFL in evaded tackles last season because he's just an incredible talent at the running back position. And then, let me throw this out there for you. So last season, obviously it's well documented, Browns pretty rough offensive line situation. Obviously signed the best free agent available, Jack Conklin. Drafted Jedrick Wills at 10th overall to address the tackles. And that should really help Nick Chubb, who had third in the NFL, 15 carries within the 5-yard line. 2 touchdowns.
Yeah. Amen,
Steve. 14 yards out of 233 running backs measured with, or quarterbacks even, within 5 yards and closer carries. Nick Chubb was the worst in every measurement that you could have out of all of them, and that speaks volumes to the line. Also, the play calling, which was atrocious. So I think of what Nick Chubb was able to do given the circumstances last season. And Cleveland, I think under Stefanski, you could see Nick Chubb, if he gets that same 15 carries within the 5, I wouldn't be surprised if instead of 2, he punches in 8 of those. And think, instead of 8 touchdowns, 14 total touchdowns. So you look at that RB10 price tag. I know a lot of people are off of Chubb right now because of Kareem Hunt. Newsflash, everybody. New coaching staff, period. Can't you throw out the window what Freddie Kitchens was crazily doing down the stretch last season? Knew everything. Nick Chubb, he's an elite talent. He will get those goal line touches. He will get fed the ball in 2020. Mark my words.
And I want to touch on the value a little bit more because we talked about Josh Jacobs, who's going 2 spots ahead of him. 2 crucial spots in drafts. Okay, but Josh Jacobs missed a couple of games. Nick Chubb did not. Nick Chubb had 30% more yardage in rushing yards with very similar pass production and averaged over 5 yards per carry to Josh Jacobs' 4.75 and got in the end zone one more. So with similar passing potential, Nick Chubb outproduced him on the ground, and yet he's going behind him in drafts right now. I'd much rather have that guy, and I'm getting him at a better value.
Nick Chubb had more total yards than Dalvin Cook last year.
That's ridiculous.
Dalvin Cook just had more touchdowns, and Nick Chubb has shown zero durability concerns since he's coming to the NFL.
Right.
So,
exactly. He's very Zeke-like in that matter. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I just want to talk up Kareem Hunt as much as I can so we can drive this price tag on Nick Chubb down and let all these people and the owner of Nick Chubb in our league of record just be down on him and accept some very nice.
Exactly.
I digress.
Guys,
moving on.
Really quick, I am so sorry, but I have to throw it out there because you brought up Dalvin Cook and the total yardage.
Yeah.
Dalvin Cook also had 15 touches within the 5-yard line, 15 carries. He got 9 of those into the end zone.
Amen.
That is the difference. And
That's
I can
it.
promise you, we'll probably see more of a flip-flop on that heading
You
into
got that
2020
right,
between these
man.
seasons.
Y'all, you know what? I was ready to move on to Miles Sanders, but now you got me all talking about the Browns. Listen, everybody, we were not wrong.
Here we go.
We were not wrong to be optimistic about the Cleveland Browns in 2019. We did not know the train wreck. We did not know that we were downgrading at the coach position after 1-31. We did not think it was possible to downgrade from that. But turns out that's what it was. And I'll tell you, from everything I hear every day from Stefanski himself and from Odell, from Jarvis, from Baker, from Miles, in a time of extreme adversity and stress, these guys that have had some maturity concerns in the past are all of a sudden in unison sounding like the most mature adult professionals that I've ever heard of.
It's amazing.
That tells you everything you need to know about what's going on in that organization from a virtual remote standpoint. Just wait till the man gets them all in person. You guys keep on sleeping on the Cleveland Browns. We're coming for you if 2020 happens. Of course, 2020 might not happen because everybody.
That would be the most Browns thing ever.
Conspiracy theory. That's the only reason that it's not happening this year. Just to keep the Cleveland Browns down. I digress. Moving on to a running back that I know Jay's going to enjoy discussing.
Let's move on to a real team, yeah.
You shut your face. Why don't you get yourself a real GM? We have got running back Miles Sanders going as RB11 at the 203 spot. This guy played all 15 games last year. He only had 170 rush attempts because Jordan Howard was still on the team for 10 games. But on those attempts, he managed 766 rushing yards. He added 3 rushing touchdowns, but he was pretty effective in the passing game. 47 receptions off 58 targets for 510 yards at an average of 8.79 yards per target. He had 3 more receiving touchdowns, and that was good enough for in total. That was good enough on the season for him to finish as RB13 in overall fantasy points. Did you guys know that Miles Sanders finished as RB13 overall last season? I mean, that is super surprising to me. Now, he's going as an RB11, but he had 20 of 24 RB2 stat ranks in 2020. He was 21st with 170 rush attempts. He was 14th in targets with 58. Plus, he was 2nd in yards per target. There are 146 vacated rush attempts and 25 vacated running back targets from 2019 amongst Jordan Howard, Darren Sproles, and Jay Ajayi. Assuming Miles got even half that volume last year, that would have made him 9th in rushing attempts with 242 and 7th in RB targets with 83. So I really understand the Miles Sanders hype this season. I do.
You have illustrated it perfectly. For a guy who finished RB21 with 170 carries, not saying he's going to get all those vacated carries, but his role did increase as the season went on, so you would expect that number to go up. And for a guy who finished RB13 overall, who's currently going RB11 in drafts, I feel like this price point is fantastic to get a guy who can give me a positive return on my investment. I love all the upside here. I love the fact that he's going to be the guy in this offense heading into his 2nd season. It's all roses for me and Miles Sanders, obviously.
Yeah, of course, Jay. I'm right there with you guys. At his price point, given the upside, he had a pretty forgettable fantasy season the first half of 2019.
Right.
But, especially once you saw Jordan Howard bow out, you saw what Miles Sanders is capable of.
Exactly.
In, real football and for us as fantasy players. And so, I hear the argument a lot. Doug Peterson does not do anything but a timeshare, but Doug Peterson also hasn't had a Miles Sanders to play with either. So
that's a good point.
There's going to be a little risk. That's unproven by his price point, but he's somebody who you could envision finishing much higher than RB13 if he's given the lion's share workload of that backfield in that offense.
You're right, Steve. And to your point about what he did once Jordan Howard left, he ended up as RB9 in consistency performances weeks 10 to 16 and RB7 in Foresight consistency that measures how well you improve throughout the year. So even though he finished as RB20 in fantasy points per game, even though he finished as RB13 in overall fantasy points, you know, the consistency towards the end of the season and the Foresight consistency tells you a whole different story.
Yeah, the trend of when he became really the lead back in that offense should tell you where he belongs overall in the fantasy football running back landscape. And for a guy who had 170 rushing attempts, you know, like you said, Steve, even if they go with a committee, they had split 146 carries between 3 guys last year, and one of those guys entered the season as the lead dog in that rushing attack. So really, I do expect them to spell him at times, but I think his rushing numbers are really going to increase and could be top 12 numbers. And if that happens for a guy who finished RB13 overall in points and RB21 in rush attempts last year, if all of a sudden he's getting RB12 rush attempts this year, I mean, he should easily be able to improve on his current price tag in drafts.
You're right.
Thank you.
We've got another exciting. Well, yeah, it's seldom, so you're welcome.
Oh, hey, and you know, the passing attack, real quick, is still a mess. That is not changing at this time. It's going to take time for that to get on track. So,
which goes right into our theory that Miles could have a very productive year.
Exactly.
That would spell good things for him.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they got to keep Carson Wentz healthy.
Yeah. Amen.
I mean,
and that'll help.
You know, at least during the fantasy season, he was able to pull that off last year. So from that standpoint, that's, you know.
They could trade him for Nick Foles. That would help, but whatever. All right, I digress. Let's go.
All right, I think I have a theory that I'm going to be on an island on this next guy because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 running backs to cover after this guy. This is the running back that I would take over all of them.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm going to be on an island on this, I know, but we're talking about LA Chargers running back Austin Ekeler. He is currently going as RB12 at the 206. Last year, he played all 15 games. He only had 123 rush attempts, but converted that to 511 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. Where he was most efficient was in the passing game. He had 83 receptions on 97 targets weeks 1 through 16 with 950 receiving yards at a rate of 9.79 yards per target, and he added 8 receiving touchdowns. In 2019, guys, Ekeler had 17 of 24 top 6 running back stat ranks. Now, we have another pro-con set of changes here as far as his situation goes. On the one hand, his number 1 yards per target could very well suffer, going from Phillip Rivers at the quarterback position to a combination of Tyrod Taylor and Justin Herbert. But on the other hand, he'll undoubtedly benefit from Tyrod's checkdowns and Melvin Gordon's departure. He vacated Melvin Gordon 148 rush attempts and 48 targets. Thus, Ekeler's 97 targets may not regress at all, and they may actually go up. Assuming Ekeler got even half of Melvin Gordon's volume in 2019, it would have made him 21st up from 34th in rush attempts with 197 and second in targets up from 3rd with 121. I really feel like Ekeler is a very nice value this season at the RB12.
Well, Ben, I'm not going to disagree with you entirely just because of what we saw last season while Melvin Gordon was holding out. In the 2019 season, we've talked about it. The few games where he got to be the premier back in that backfield, we were very disappointed in his fantasy production after seeing how efficient he could be with his limited opportunities. And when he finally got the volume, the fantasy scoring just wasn't there, and it was almost inexplicable.
Last year.
So we went into 2019 thinking, okay, he's being overvalued because he's going to start out the season as lead dog, but we've seen this. We've seen that he can't be the number 1 guy. Well, he proved us wrong, finally. So we know now that he can still be efficient but still get the bulk of the opportunities. So I see why people are valuing him where they are now, taking him as the RB12 because of the upside. But to your point, it might still be a little bit too expensive for me at this point.
He finished as RB4 overall, RB4 in fantasy points per game, RB4 in consistency weeks 1 through 16, RB4 in consistency weeks 10 through 16 after Melvin Gordon came back, and RB6 in Foresight consistency that measures how you do throughout the season. And like you said, Jay, we were on this guy from the beginning. Total Foresight was on this guy from the beginning. It's not our fault that it didn't work out for a short time, but in 2019, he proved us right, and you shouldn't doubt it.
Well, I mean, listen, I can't argue with any of that. And if I'm sitting here at this point in the draft and I need a running back with the guys going behind him, I'd much rather have him. So I'm going to take Austin Ekeler, and I'm going to feel very good about it because you talked about what his passing production was last year. And even with the question marks at quarterback, that passing volume should be safe this season. So I do like that. And again, I like him. There's a little bit of uncertainty there for me just because I was burnt so much by him in 2018 and those scars still remain. Steve, break this tie. Not that I'm completely against Ben, because I'm not, but...
That's the main thing, guys, is we see his price point. So you would think in a reality where a running back finishes as RB4 and all those different metrics, and you remove the other star running back, Melvin Gordon, that he would be going much higher in
drafts.
Right,
yeah, that's a good point.
The case.
Yeah.
And obviously that's because of, Phillip Rivers isn't there. And,
Phillip Rivers wasn't that great last year.
That's what I'm trying to say is, like, at the end of the day, Tyrod Taylor, the passing volume will certainly be lower. LA, if they have a good if their defense is healthy, they should have a pretty decent defense. So you think, like, that formula, there should be a lower passing volume. However, Tyrod Taylor is a quarterback who does not turn the ball over. He'll check down. He'll make safe decisions. I feel like Austin Ekeler, sure, he's going to have less targets. He's going to have less receptions. But
maybe
he's going to be relied on. He's going to be relied on in that offense. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of people out there like Joshua Jackson. They drafted Joshua Kelly. It's like, guys, these are like 4th, 7th round draft picks.
Right.
Like,
okay.
They're not in competition. So I just feel like, to agreeing more, I guess, with you, Ben, like, at the RB12, I feel like there's definitely some room there. I just think he's going to surprise people. Like, people are saying, like, oh, RB12's too expensive. He'll be a mid-range RB2. That Austin Ekeler's a really good football player.
Okay, let me pose this to you guys. For a team where Phillip Rivers, admittedly, was not at his best last season and threw a lot of interceptions, but the guy would sling the rock and he would throw deep to his targets because he had plenty of talent on the outside to throw to. A lot of good talent. Now they have two quarterbacks who don't throw the ball downfield nearly as much. Defenses are going to know that. They're going to dare them to throw the ball downfield, so they're going to load the box more and come after and apply pressure to two quarterbacks who they know aren't going to threaten them deep and are going to check down and they're going to apply pressure. So is Austin Ekeler going to be operating with less room? And is he going to be nearly as efficient with that less room as he's been in years past?
Number one, he doesn't have to. Number two, you have to respect Tyrod Taylor's running game. Number three, Tyrod Taylor is a little bit underrated, in my opinion, as an efficient quarterback. He's also somebody that does like to check down. And even if I don't think that his target volume is going down whatsoever, I think it might go up. And even though I do believe that his yards per target will go down, I think that's going to be mitigated by his increase in rushing volume. So, like we're talking about, last season he finished as RB4. I don't think his total equation has changed that much that he's going to be too far off what he did in 2019, in 2020 without Melvin Gordon. I understand that Phillip Rivers several years ago was a great quarterback. He was terrible last year. He is not that much better at this point than Tyrod Taylor. He is just not. So, like Steve said, Ekeler's going to surprise a lot of people. He's not going to surprise me. And at RB12, it's very easy for him to return a positive ROI on that investment.
All right. Now, I'm very curious to hear your guys' thoughts on our next player.
Yeah, moving on to some boring running backs. This guy. Next up,
okay.
Green Bay.
Mystery solved.
Green Bay Packers running back Aaron Jones. He's currently going as RB13 at the 207. He played all 15 games last year. He had 211 rushing attempts for 984 yards. He had 16 rushing touchdowns because the Packers hate A-Rod. He also added 47 receptions on 62 targets for 431 receiving yards and 3 additional receiving touchdowns. 19 total touchdowns boosted this guy up a lot this season. He was RB2 overall. He was RB3 in fantasy points per game. But as you dig a little deeper, he was RB9 in regular consistency weeks 1 through 16. He was RB14 in consistency weeks 10 through 16. Aaron Jones had a very nice 2019 season. However, his regression expectations comes down to 2 things in my mind. Number 1, the 19 total touchdowns with 16 on the ground. That is not going to continue because number 2, they drafted in the second round an inside the tackles goal line type of running back, A.J. Dillon. So even at the price of RB13, I am still leery about Jones's 2020 outlook because his situation has changed far more than Austin Ekeler's.
Has it? Did the Packers add a bunch of weapons on offense at the receiver position that I'm unaware of?
He's going to regress in those rushing touchdowns. He's not going to have
Who knows?
Aaron Jones is not having 19 touchdowns this year. He's just not. Period.
Oh, I feel like all right.
We need a Foresight podcast bet.
I think so. I think we need a wager.
Okay, so you're betting that he will have 19 or more touchdowns this
Jay,
year.
don't do it.
Just shut up, Steve.
I'll take a wager. What do you want to bet on it? I'll have some fun. Let's do this. I'm already going to dye my hair purple. What do you want to add to it?
By the next podcast episode, Jay and I will come and agree to terms on whether or not our bet of Aaron Jones will meet or exceed 19 touchdowns.
All
Thank
right.
you for the free whatever. It's great.
Yeah, I think 10 would probably be a fair bet. So
Shut your face, Steve. You said 19.
No, listen, I think Aaron Jones was maybe one of the biggest surprises of the 2019 season because of his fantasy production. He was an absolute stud. And I don't know anybody who expected him to get through all 15 games healthy and be available, which was fantastic. And those touchdowns.
Do it twice in a row?
What's that?
Think you can do it? He can do it twice in a row?
Yeah, I don't know. No, but I'm saying, I mean, and those touchdowns were icing on the cake to a very productive fantasy season. So, you know, for a guy who finished elite RB last season, yes, is there a drop-off or do we expect some regression? Absolutely. RB13, it's a fair price tag. I'm not going to get too upset about that.
It's a fine price tag. I just think he's going to have a hard time exceeding the value this season. Because partially, I think A-Rod's going to audible every play into a pass and flip off his coaching staff after he breaks every huddle. But, you know, we'll get to see. And it's going to be fun for me and Jay to have a bet about this because that's just fun.
Absolutely. Why not?
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Guys, the biggest thing when it comes to Aaron Jones is that he is a Packers running back and Matt LaFleur is their head coach. And you saw it last year. This guy, he'd have weeks where he could win you your week. He had weeks where he basically didn't exist because Matt LaFleur insisted upon giving Jamal Williams, show in the NFL, giving him work, and they did bring in A.J. Dillon, so it's just it's a scary price tag.
The lone offensive weapon besides Devin Funchess that they brought to the team.
Well, and that's what I mean is so we have this list, it's Todd Gurley and Leonard Fournette are coming up here next. Those guys I see having a defined, consistent workload week to week. So it just depends on an RB13 at the 207. That's your mid-second round pick. You better be ready to roll the dice each and every week and see just, like what side of the bed Matt LaFleur rolled off of to start his day.
We know how this fantasy game works after all the years we've been playing, and I'm going to draft Aaron Jones at some point just so every time he scores a touchdown, I can text Ben, touchdown Aaron Jones. And Ben, your history in fantasy should tell you that that's going to happen a lot just because fantasy.
You
That's
know
a
what?
true point.
You know what? I don't care about just because anything. I will bet all day that Aaron Jones will not receive 19 touchdowns in 2020, and I will be right, and I won't sweat.
God, I hope he breaks
hard.
it with like 4 games left.
A.J. Dillon might have more rushing touchdowns than Aaron Jones this season. He might, and I'm not betting on that. Moving on, we have got Atlanta Falcons running back for the first time ever. Todd Gurley going as RB15 at the 210 spot. Gurley for the LA Rams was able to play 14 of 15 games through weeks 1 through 16 last year. He had 203 rushing attempts for 789 yards, only had 3.9 yards per carry, but he had 12 rushing touchdowns. He added 29 receptions on 47 targets for 186 receiving yards, and he only averaged 3.96 yards per target. He added another 2 receiving touchdowns for 14 total. So he finished his RB14 overall. He finished his RB14 in fantasy points per game. He finished as Foresight consistency RB5 because he absolutely balled out down the stretch. But I will say, Gurley is one that I was actually higher on before completing the research for this podcast. I really liked what his consistency work, but when I dove into the numbers, now I'm not so sure. I know he was running behind a poor O-line, and he's now upgrading in that department. But Gurley's season was largely supported by those 14 total touchdowns, which is 1 less than all Falcons running back touchdowns in 2019. He also had just 1 top 6 week, and he was 31st in yards per carry. So because of all that, he's going to need to vastly improve his efficiency and or sustain those touchdown numbers to return any sort of value on that RB15 price tag, not to mention remain healthy.
Everybody was down on Gurley heading into last season because of the knee issues, and there was a lot of concern there. And if you go back and listen to our preview podcast, we weren't on that same boat. We said, hey, listen, it's okay if they monitor his carries and save him for later in the season. He can still be a valuable asset to your fantasy team, even if he's a back-end RB1, high-end RB2. And that's exactly what happened. They limited his carries early on, and you saw him explode down the stretch, like you said, Ben, and really be valuable. And he averaged a touchdown a game last season during the entire fantasy season. Now, it's a different story heading into this season. And Ben, you painted that picture. I'm much more concerned. Seeing the volume on the ground and how dependent he was on touchdowns, I don't know if that volume is sustainable, if he can continue to get the ball in the end zone that much. And really at the RB15 price tag, that's probably a fair price, but it's just, that seems to be the high end of where I think he's going to finish this fantasy season. So I feel like I'm paying a premium now for Todd Gurley, somebody who I don't know if I can really rely on for the duration of this season.
So maybe it's some of my past love affair with Todd Gurley.
Steve likes someone!
Oh, I absolutely love Todd Gurley at RB15. For several reasons. One, Ben, you spoke to it, his touchdown total, 14. Yeah, that certainly did help carry him. Only 6 of those came on, goal line carries. So, that still shows me he has the ability to get in the end zone from not necessarily just being fed a goal line touch. And then when I look at his receiving numbers, I'm like, are you kidding me? The Todd Gurley, who was a fantasy superstar at one point in time, he was a guy that flirted with 800 receiving yards. He was utilized. That's what made him dangerous. He was equally a dangerous receiver out of the backfield. They just didn't utilize him that way last season. And I think a lot of that stems to the offensive line problems, protecting Jared Goff, just everything that went into what the Rams had to do to scheme last season. When he goes into Atlanta, I think he'll be used a lot more in the passing game, so there's going to be that extra added PPR value. And the offense in general, so much better than what he had going on in LA, including the line. And the biggest thing for me is don't care about whatever's going on with his knee. It's a 1-year, prove it, $5 million contract. In LA, he was still under a mega deal. So, to me, there's we're going to monitor his usage, protect, our asset at running back throughout the season, see how things work out. I just feel like Atlanta, they're going to use Todd Gurley, and they did not bring anyone in via the draft or free agency. So for me, RB15, I just kind of feel like he may only last 8 weeks, but he's somebody that I find myself drafting a lot in mock drafts because he just falls. He just falls to me in the third round a lot of times.
Well, in the third round, going several spots later than the ADP of 210, I definitely have a much easier time going for it. But at RB15, it makes me a little bit nervous. He had less than 1,000 total yards last season. Now, if he can sustain his touchdowns and he can stay healthy, I don't think he'll have a problem besting his yardage next season. So
one of the worst lines to one of the best.
Agreed. I will say this, though. If I am in a spot where I feel like Gurley is the best person for me to take at a certain point, I am going to ride him and hype him to my league and talk so much trash about Todd Gurley for the first 5-6 weeks of the season. And then I'm going to secretly, feverishly try to move him before week 8.
Well, that's it. And we talked about it. We talked about the importance of picking up wins early, and he may be great at that. He may explode out of the gates and really have a nice impact early. And then, like you said, Ben, then you look to wheel and deal before it's too late.
Yeah, and once you get to this point in the draft, you're dealing with some uncertainty, and that's why the price point is what it is.
Speaking of uncertainty,
I was going to say, but there's a guy going right behind him as RB16 at the 302 that I'm not sure that I wouldn't prefer over Todd Gurley in 2020. We're talking about Jacksonville Jaguars running back Leonard Fournette, also in the last year of his deal. He played all 15 games last season, 265 attempts, had more rushing yards than Gurley had total combined yards. He only had 3 rushing touchdowns. He had 0 receiving touchdowns. This guy finished better than Todd Gurley by 8 spots. He was RB6 compared to Gurley's 14, and Gurley had 14 touchdowns compared to Leonard Fournette's 3. Now, Leonard Fournette added 100 targets, 76 receptions, and 522 yards. And so I just don't understand why people are so low on Fournette heading into 2020. This man had 16 of 24 RB1 stat ranks, 13 of which were top 6 in 2019. I get that there's the expectation that Chris Thompson will eat into Fournette's 100 targets primarily because of his relationship with new offensive coordinator Jay Gruden. However, oft-injured Chris Thompson is now 29. He has missed 17 of 48 games in the last 3 seasons due to injury, and he's missed a lot more before that. At RB16 at the top of the third, I think there is a very strong potential for a positive return on that price tag for Fournette in 2020. He finished better than Todd Gurley in so many metrics. It's not even funny. I know that the situation's changed, but if the Jacksonville Jaguars defense is going to be as bad as we think it is, they're going to be playing from behind. Fournette's going to be utilized, and even if they pass a ton, that's still going to help Fournette, even if Chris Thompson gets a little bit of work.
Ben, my major concern with Leonard Fournette is, 1, we've seen durability issues in the past, and 2, the Jaguars declined his 5th-year option, so I don't know if he's going to be on their team come the start of the season.
They're rebuilding, man. And if he's not, his situation, I think, can only get better.
That is true, but there's some uncertainty there, so I just, like you said, the players going around this area all have some uncertainty, and that's just his for me. I do like his upside and his elite ability, but I would like to answer some of those questions before I buy in. Hopefully by now I've addressed a running back in my draft and I don't feel the pressure to have to snag one of these guys at this point, and I can look somewhere else by going with a nice value receiver or something different.
Yeah, I feel you there, Jay, for sure. And yeah, when it comes to Fournette at that RB16 price tag, like you are at the point where you could get a sensational value,
right?
If things stand how they are. Like right now, I mean, who's the running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars? It looks like it will be Leonard Fournette. And Ben, you make a fantastic point that I'm sure we can all agree with. Chris Thompson would be a PPR target monster at running back for the 16 quarters he might play throughout the entire 20.
That's pretty generous,
season.
Steve.
That's true. I take that back. We'll say 12.
Okay.
But that's the thing, and we saw it last year where Jacksonville, trash defense, they're behind. You guys know in our league of record, I had Leonard Fournette. I cannot tell you how much I love fourth quarters of games because he would just get 4-yard pass, 6-yard pass, 7-yard pass, but in PPR, that equates to points. So do I see him getting 100 targets again? Only Austin Ekeler and Christian McCaffrey have more targets. So, I mean, that to me a little bit of an outlier, but could he have 70, 80? If he's the starting running back and Chris Thompson goes down, which is inevitable, and this team is behind constantly, and I will say this, I went back and looked at the game logs. There is not a drop-off between, say, Nick Foles versus Gardner Minshew as far as his targets are concerned. So Gardner Minshew will happily check down, I'm sure, to Leonard Fournette also. So if he's healthy and he is the running back on the Jacksonville Jaguars, RB16 is very cheap. But like you said, Jay, there are always red flags when it comes to Leonard Fournette.
There are red flags, but I think it would be very easy for him to improve on his 3 total touchdowns last year.
Sure.
So whatever he may lose from those 100 targets, I think he will sustain in his rushing game, and I think he will improve on 3 total touchdowns, making him an immense value at the top of the third, going as RB16. Imagine taking Christian McCaffrey or one of those stud RBs at the top of your draft, coming back around at the top of the third, and getting Leonard Fournette as your RB2.
Yeah, make a great point about the 3 touchdowns. I was looking at it. Carries for running backs inside the 5-yard line, inexplicably, and I experienced this as a Fournette owner last year, he only got 8 of them. I have no idea why. There's so many times where it's like, you're at the 3-yard line, you just threw the ball 3 straight times, and you have Leonard Fournette as your running back.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Makes no sense.
Yep. So I just think, you put me in a spot where I am at the third, and I have to go with Gurley or Fournette. Fournette had an immensely better season than Gurley did last year. Gurley's situation is changing drastically. There's always seemed to be that up and down about his injury. Before last season, Leonard had some injury concerns of his own, but it's a tough one, and I'm glad we got a couple more months before I'm going to be forced to make that call. So we are now at an hour and 39 minutes. If you have lasted with us for this long, bless you.
God bless you. Yeah,
we love you so much. Injury concerns.
Yeah, Steve's not going to get his sleep tonight, so you guys better watch out. We want to keep him on his 2 feet. So moving on to the last running back of this episode, going at RB17 at the 304. Got a guy that I think is going to be sneaky good for people in 2020. You got Denver Broncos running back now, Melvin Gordon. In 11 total games that he played last year, he was able to muster 8 total touchdowns on 196 total touches, 148 rushing attempts for 566 yards, only a 3.8 yards per carry. He missed half the season, so, he was clearly rusty for a while before he got his legs under him. And he ended up having 36 receptions on 48 targets, 220 yards, and another receiving touchdown. based on the contract signing and the money that was invested in Melvin Gordon, I would expect him to get roughly 50 to 60% of the total RB volume in Denver. Last year, guys, Denver ran the ball 499 times. 499. So based on 2019's volume, if you give 50 to 60% of that to Melvin Gordon, that's roughly 250 to 299 rush attempts and roughly 78 to 93 targets. With a career average of 4.8 yards per touch, that kind of volume would, based on his historical numbers, equate to roughly 1,574 to 1,881 total yards. I really like the upside of Melvin Gordon at RB17 this year.
God, I hate agreeing with you, but at RB17, how is he not of value? I mean, we all know my issues with Melvin Gordon. The guy hasn't played a full slate of games in any season of his career to date. Now, last year it was because of a holdout, but the previous 3 seasons he couldn't make it to the end of the season, which is when you need a guy like him the most, and he just breaks your back come fantasy playoff time, and that leaves a sour taste in your mouth. But, like you said, Ben, what do we always say? Follow the money. And the money is with Melvin Gordon in this crowded backfield, mind you. But, if a guy like this and the money they paid him doesn't work out, that contract becomes an albatross for the team, and people end up losing their jobs. So he's going to get the bulk of the carries and the bulk of the opportunities, and they're going to keep feeding him, because if they don't, it's disaster for everybody. So, he's a dynamic guy. He always has been and he always will be. But like we've talked about with, a Todd Gurley, I'm going to ride him hot and heavy early in the season and pick up wins and make everybody look foolish after having picked him up at RB17, but then I am going to look to deal him prior to the trade deadline.
There's nothing wrong with that, Jay, but just remember how excited you and I were about Royce Freeman.
I know.
I know it's funny because we were wrong, but Melvin Gordon is more talented than Royce Freeman in the NFL. You make a very valid point that's similar to how I feel about Todd Gurley. You would want to look to trade Melvin by midpoint of the season if you went that direction. You know what? There's merit to that. But how many guys at this point in the draft have a legitimate potential for 1,500 plus yards?
Oh, absolutely.
Not many.
Right.
And, once you're starting to get to like the middle of the third round, like if you're somebody that drafted, at the 106 and then the 207 and you're now back at the 306, Melvin Gordon at that range is a fine.
Oh, sure.
Too.
Sure.
So,
and that's where I am as far as Gordon's concerned, guys, is if through the first 2 rounds I feel very comfortable as far as the guys I've drafted being like guys I think I can rely on that are concrete, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go for a little risk, a little upside in the 3rd round. I really like Melvin Gordon here because he obviously has the potential to well outperform RB17.
Yes, right.
So that's where, maybe you call your shot. And like we've talked about, when you're getting into the 3rd round, as crazy as it sounds, there's a lot of question marks with a lot of guys. I mean, yeah, sure. It's a crowded backfield. There still is Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman. It's a Vic Fangio coached team. Granted, Pat Shurmur's there now as the offensive coordinator. That should help. But, how much of a workload will Gordon get? What that's going to translate into. And Jay, as you pointed out, the only time Melvin Gordon's been healthy for your fantasy playoffs was because last year when he held out the first month of the season.
Right.
So there's always that inherent risk with him. But,
But hey, maybe this is the perfect year for Melvin Gordon. Maybe we won't even get to the fantasy playoffs, so he'll actually be healthy for the entire season.
But yeah, well, and like we spoke to a lot of times tonight, like if it is a shortened season and it's like, hey, get as many wins, as many points as possible. Melvin Gordon is not a bad 3rd round pick.
Absolutely.
And like you said, Jay, you can look to deal him if he's on a
RB17 with RB1 upside.
Yeah, absolutely.
Steve, the point you made that I love is, with Melvin Gordon going into 304, maybe as late, to middle of the 3rd round, if you have picked very reliable guys in the first 2 rounds, and now you're at your 3rd pick, Melvin Gordon's the guy that I'm much more likely to roll the dice on than I am with my 2nd pick on Todd Gurley. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you only draft one guy, and then you have to roll the dice on Todd Gurley, or you can draft 2 guys, one of which is probably a high-end RB when you're at that point in the draft.
Yeah.
And then have your 3rd pick, probably likely your RB2, because you probably went wide receiver in the 2nd round. I mean,
I completely agree.
Yeah, but I can see the merits for both. But like we've discussed, once you get to this point in the draft, you do have some uncertainty.
Yeah, I should say for anyone who's listening, like, disclaimer, when it came to Todd Gurley, I was totally kind of disregarding the ADP and kind of looking at it from the aspect of, in a lot of mock drafts I've been doing, I get him in the 3rd round a lot, and I find that of value. But at the 208,
I would agree.
That's dicey. So I do agree with you, Ben. And like I talked about, like, I'll take Melvin Gordon in the 3rd over Todd Gurley in the 2nd.
Yeah.
100%. Absolutely.
And if you're drafting at the 210, you probably went high-end RB at like the 103. So do you really need to roll the dice on an RB2 at the end of the 2nd? I don't think so. I think you go with a rock-solid wide receiver 1 at that.
Hey, who knew we'd do this in under 24 hours?
I mean, we didn't even make it to 2.
I know. Shocker.
We should totally do something like ESPN does, where we just have like
you shut your filthy mouth right now.
We just are like, we're live 24 straight hours, fantasy football down in my basement.
Yeah, I was gonna say it'll be one at a time while we all others sleep for the rest of the time. Oh man, yeah, great episode, guys. Man, a lot of fun. And aren't you glad now, both you two and the listeners out there, that we went ahead and covered tight ends last week? Because now we're not going to have a drop off in interesting content next week. It is going to be the wide receivers to round out the 2019 What We Learned episodes. And before we get out of here, just gotta say thank you, Scott Fish. Scott Fish Bowl 10, baby. Got my invite this week. Now 2 of the 3 members on this podcast have been invited. We gotta get Steve-O in there. We got another nomination in there for Steve. Hopefully we get 3 for 3 on Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. But so far, Jay and I have both been extended the invite, and we are looking to represent Total Foresight and Fantasy Foresight very proudly. So either one of you guys got anything else before we get out of here?
Nope, can't wait to dive into wide receivers next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Had a great time tonight, guys.
For sure. Yeah, and 2 weeks from tonight, we will be joined by an currently unknown number of the extended Team Foresight, but for a mock draft episode. It's going to be 12-team PPR redraft with a bunch of knuckleheads that is going to be sure to be entertaining for everyone out there. And hopefully with the new live format, we can stress censoring. We will do our best. We promise. But next week, it's just going to be the 3 of us that you can trust. And we will be back to discuss the wide receivers and what we learned in 2019. Can't wait.
And that wraps up this episode of Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We thank you for joining us. Be sure to visit us, as always, at fantasyforesight.com. Use the links at the bottom of the page to find us across social media, including Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and wherever you pod. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next time.